out of my. I didn't really check my backup. I mean, it should mostly be fine. This is where I sit for work, but
Okay. No highly confidential documents like exposed.
no, or
Okay.
anything potentially inappropriate or yeah.
Okay. Very good. Well, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. This is my basically first actual like interview like this. So, have you done many before?
I do a lot of like career focused interviews. So,
Okay.
I did my PhD in linguistics and I don't work in academia. I work in industry, and this is a it's a very interesting thing for a lot of students who are currently doing their PhDs because as a graduate student, you don't really get a lot of advice on how to do anything aside from be a professor. So there's a
Mm,
whole industry around like PhDs in industry talking to current students and that sort of thing. So I do a lot in kind of that respect, like talking about my job and career path.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Interesting. And that is kind of an interesting career path. It's one of those jo like one of those fields of study, I think, where you go into it just for the love of it and interest in it, but not necessarily thinking about some practical career that it could lead to. Um, when you were, I guess, from your studies to how you, I guess, ended up here in this role, is that something that you envisioned? You wanted to kind of put it to work in a practical way, or is it something you fell into? How'd you kind of end up involved in with Mango?
I mean, the short answer is no. I wanted to be a professor. That was really my goal. So I was a neuroscience and French major, and I basically did neurolinguistics in grad schools, neurolinguistics and psycholinguistics. So how does the mind and the brain learn and process language? And yeah, so my goal was to be a professor, and it's just it's a numbers game basically. I didn't make it, but I did a postdoc for a few years, and I did some adjunct teaching, and then I was like, okay, let's think about where else I can go. I did the one hard thing for me about academia is it's sometimes hard to see the application of it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think always have that a little bit in the back of my mind, like how could I do something that's more applied? So I'm happy with how it ended up.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously in academia you help people as well because you're helping your students to pursue this thing that they love. But I think something like this where you're able to reach so many more people with the stuff you do is pretty cool as well. That's
It's a massively different amount of people for
yeah,
sure.
for sure.
Yeah.
So I guess going back a little bit, can you tell me a little bit about your background in linguistics even before maybe you started studying it formally? Have languages always kind of played a major role in your life, or is that something you developed later?
Yes, I always really loved languages. I'm not I wouldn't consider myself a polyglot by any means, but I remember kind of some of my earliest memories are like getting a book on how to count to 10 in Mandarin and also a book on Pig Latin. I remember teaching myself Pig Latin when I was like 7. And then in I ended up studying French in middle school, and I had this idea that I really wanted to learn all the Romance languages, which at the time I thought was Spanish, French, and Italian. I didn't know that there were others, but and so my school actually had this kind of weird situation where they had stopped teaching French. I'm from a very Italian neighborhood. So they had stopped teaching French. They only offered Spanish and Italian. And then this one year, they offered a French after school program. And then all these kids wanted to take French. So they had my class for however many years, 5 years or something. We had a French class. And I don't know if there's been one since. There hadn't been for a few years before, but I just happened to fall into this year where they offered a French class. And I mean, vastly influenced the direction of my life, which is really interesting. So I did that, and I majored in French and neuroscience, and then I studied Spanish a little bit in college. And yeah, I was very interested in neuroscience and human behavior. And to me, language is just, I mean, the most fascinating human behavior there is, right? So it's just so much to it, and so that's why I decided to go into neurolinguistics.
Very cool. Yeah. I find that I think that's the case for a lot of people who are kind of linguistics minded, is that that is kind of the gateway, is just like interest in language. And it's funny too that you mentioned the book on Pig Latin because for some people, I feel like language, and it is this, it's a gateway to kind of other cultures and kind of being able to participate in other cultures, which is amazing. But some people just kind of like want to see how this thing ticks. And so when it's
Yeah.
a made up play language like Pig Latin, but even that is interesting to you, I think that's kind of a that's a good tell. You're
Right.
going
Like,
down
how do
this
you
career path.
play with it? It's
Yeah.
really, that's, I think, a really fun part of language.
What are the mechanics of this thing, even if it's like a made up version of a
Mhm.
language? Yeah. That's pretty cool. Very nice. So when you first, by the time you got to your undergraduate, did you know that this was the kind of the path you wanted to go down, or did it take a couple years to kind of drift
I
from?
don't, I don't think I knew what linguistics was until my junior year of
Mm,
college. So I was very interested in neuroscience. I was really more of a science-minded person. I always have been. That was kind of what interested me, but I just always loved languages and behavior. I remember learning what neuroscience was when I was in high school. I think a junior or senior in high school, because I was very interested in how biology affects behavior. So when I was younger, it was kind of more like genetics or just, different environmental things that affect your biology that affect your behavior. I was just very, very fascinated by this. And so then, yeah, I learned what neuroscience was, which is basically, the science behind cognitive behavior, usually. I guess neurobiology is kind of a broader, more biological behavior as well. But and then I was very interested in keeping up the language part while I was in college. And then a few years in, I had a friend who was a linguist. He was a visiting Spanish teacher, like a TA. We always had visiting TAs for the languages. And that's how I learned what linguistics was. And I was like, this is amazing. This is the direction I need to go in.
very cool. Yeah, I'm glad it worked out. You ended up finding that path. Well, so we'll do a little bit of a shifting gears here, talking more specifically about Mango and some of the methodologies you guys use. What would you say are, if you were to kind of reduce it to bullet points, the things that sets Mango apart from maybe some of the other mainstream apps and some of the things that you guys try to focus on that maybe are neglected in other areas of the market?
Yeah, I think there are a few things that set Mango apart in the way that we focus on how we teach languages. So one is that it's very conversation based, and we really focus on trying to get people speaking. And so if you looked at a Mango course? Have you seen what it looks like?
I think I have like maybe 350 hours of
Oh, okay.
work on. So yeah, I've been
Okay.
in it a little
So
bit.
yeah. Um, so Mango, right. So what we do is we have this conversation-based approach where every chapter starts with a conversation. It's kind of an authentic, not a real life conversation, but a very realistic conversation that people would actually have. It's not just teaching you, kind of random words in a, or, like sets of vocabulary words that are going to be about a specific topic, and you build on from there, which is how I think a lot of language courses tend to work, or at least traditionally tended to work. It's more, what are you actually going to need and want to use? And so we have these conversations. And so right off the bat, it's very meaningful, useful language. And then what we do is we break down those conversations and then guide the learner to build them back up. And so the way that works is that we call our methodology intuitive language construction. So basically, we'll take a sentence, break it down and teach the individual words and guide the learners to put them back together. And then we guide them to actually use critical thinking to figure out, okay, now if you wanted to say the same sentence but with this word instead, or if you wanted to change it a little bit, how would you do that? We have them actually practice doing that, and they get, feedback on whether or not that was correct. And so you're really kind of forcing the learner to analyze what they're hearing and thinking about it. And so that's the idea there, is that that should really build up a more robust implicit understanding of the language. Um, and then the other part of that is, there's a lot to be said for implicit learning, like where you're not conscious of what you're learning. in terms of language tends, well, in terms of a lot of things, but certainly in language tends to be a very robust way to learn and a way to really develop more automatic skills. But it can be a lot slower, it can be a lot harder. And we know from decades of research in language learning that a lot of times learners need some sort of explicit instruction. And so we have these uh, grammar notes peppered throughout our lessons. So if learners get to something that we think might be a little bit difficult or that they might need a little bit of an explanation on, we have a grammar note that's going to help them so they're not kind of going down the wrong path. We're kind of keeping them, in line, the sort of the bumpers, if you will, for language learning. And yeah, and that's kind of in line with this idea of focus on form from second language acquisition
Great.
research. Mhm.
Yeah, and I think the method really it's a good balance, I think, between the implicit and explicit learning. It's hard to find something that's going to be perfect for everyone because people have, I feel like, different tolerances for being explicitly explained grammar rules, but kind of having the balance, I think, is good for most people. Kind of along the lines of what you were just talking about, I noticed I remember from one of your videos you mentioned the topic of language traps. Can you talk a little bit about what a language trap is and how you guys try to implement them?
Have you seen the videos?
Of course, got to do your research.
Okay, so I watched some of your videos too. Right. So these slides that I were talking about earlier, where we're encouraging learners to do critical thinking, where they're using language that they haven't necessarily learned before, and they have to build it together. That's critical thinking. And then a lot of those are what we call educational traps, where we kind of trick the learner. So, for example, we might have you, maybe we've taught you how to say something like, let's see, I'm trying to think like l'arbre in French, that's masculine, right? L'arbre est vert, right?
Yeah.
So the tree is green. Okay. And then we say, okay, can you say the apple is green? And so then if you haven't learned or haven't figured out noun and adjective agreement, you might say la pomme est verte. And so that's a chance for us to say, no, that's not right. It's actually la pomme est verte because you need to make sure you do that agreement. And so we kind of let learners try, which is really important, and then also let them fail, which is also very important, as long as you're going to give them that feedback to say, well, you did it wrong, but this is why, and this is going to help you kind of pay more attention and build on those skills.
Very good. And I think that's a super cool concept and a good I think for me at least personally, like it's something that does achieve those goals of kind of like piquing my interest. Why is this like that? And kind of makes you want to dig in and also helps you remember it. I could imagine maybe some people finding that a little bit frustrating, right? Like, well, how was I ever supposed to get this if you never
Yes.
explained it to me? When it comes to either implementing those educational traps or other elements of kind of balancing the explicit and implicit learning, are there any metrics that you guys look for when you put out a course to see whether it's kind of nailing it or maybe it's going too far on one side or the other, or is it just kind of by feedback, general feedback?
I think there's not a way that we're testing it per se. I think it's more, having made so many of these courses, we have basically kind of a methodology and a general rule of thumb for how and when we're going to put these in. And we always have the people that work on these courses, there's always a linguist or multiple linguists, but then there's always language teachers and native speakers who are really at the heart of developing the content. And so they really understand, the ins and outs of these specific languages and then also what students are going to struggle with.
Very nice. So by the time the course comes out, you've kind of gone through the back and forth of like, this is where this needs to be in line with the other courses that you guys have made in the past.
Yeah, and we get feedback. We get a lot of feedback from learners, and sometimes they don't like it. Sometimes they do. A lot of times they do. But there are always things where it's not going to be everyone's favorite, or maybe won't work for everybody. And if we get feedback and we think, yeah, you know what, they're actually right, that really needs a little bit more explanation, or that was just way too hard for them to get on their own, or even like in that case, maybe it's not worth making the mistake. Maybe they need to build something up, then we incorporate that feedback.
Very nice. And you kind of talked about how having a catalog of courses that you've made before is good for informing how you're going to make the next course because you kind of have a template and sort of like a concept for what things work, what things don't work. Are there any particular languages that presented a challenge in that they kind of didn't fit the template of past languages that you had done, or you had to do a lot of work to kind of adjust it to make sure it was accurate or helpful for that language?
I don't know that I would say that there's any language in particular that's difficult. Actually, I have one I'll come back to, but in kind of a general rule, you know, languages are in a lot of ways very much the same. So they're of course very different in a lot of ways, right? They have different vocabulary, different grammar, different phonotactics and phonology, but they're all very, very similar. Like the kind of the core of it is very similar. And so you can teach most languages more or less the same way. Now we have our top, like our most robust courses, our most used courses, and our most fleshed out courses, all follow a very, very similar path. There's 5 units in each of those courses. They're all of the same topics in general, but that doesn't mean that we're presenting grammar in the same order because when you're teaching about weather in Spanish, you're going to be using different constructions than if you're teaching about weather in Russian, for example. And so we have those topics lined out, but then the conversational goals, those are lined out, but then the grammar goals are going to be different depending on the language. And that tends to more or less work in terms of the sequence that we use, but sometimes certain languages will, like some of the teachers will say, well, we can't teach, let's say, for example, weather before we teach family members. This is a made up example, but because they need to have the language and the grammar for family members before they can talk about weather. It's just too complicated. And so we do have some courses. Japanese is actually one of those top courses that we have that's a little bit more different from the others because we just needed to teach things in a different order. Um, we did recently create a Potawatomi course over the past few years, which is an American Native American course, a language from the Great Plains, no, sorry, from the Great Lakes region. So Michigan and kind of that area. And that was that was very different and very, very challenging in terms of how we were able to do that. I think the biggest thing with Potawatomi was we have phonetic pop-ups in Mango, so we'll show people like how does this sound in your language, and that was something that the tribe that worked with us didn't want to do because they have a very, very clear orthography or very shallow orthography, we say in linguistics, right? Where it just based on how it's written, you don't need to actually have any support once you learn what each letter stands for. Um, and that course, I mean, the grammar of Potawatomi is so interesting and complex, and so that was really like a fun, interesting challenge for the team that was working on that to do. And we worked really closely with the Pikagan Band of Potawatomi in Michigan to do that. So.
Man, that's really cool. So when it comes to something like that, how do you even, I guess, is there like a specialist in connecting with communities who are able to like share their expertise in the language? Or like how do you go about finding this group that you, for example, in that specific language? Is there someone whose job it is to just like find people who to connect with?
So a lot of times they actually come to us. So for a lot of our endangered and indigenous languages, they are organizations that will come to us and say, a lot of it is we're really just trying to have more resources for our speakers or for people who want to learn this language. We're trying to revitalize it or support it. And so they will come to us and ask to build a course. They're usually able to get funding from something related to their organization in that way to help support building the course. And then we always offer those courses for free.
Very nice. Okay. That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that, but now that you mention it, I guess that would make total sense that reaching out to language apps to develop a course would be a good way of kind of giving a boost to your own language, especially if it's endangered.
Yeah, and a lot of these language communities are fairly dispersed, right? So you might have people in different parts of the country, and they have so few native speakers.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I mean, they just need some way to get that word out. It's really interesting. I think that language technology has done a lot to help with language revitalization, which is not something that I would have necessarily considered, but having worked at Mango and then also just kind of being in the space and seeing the sorts of things that different communities are doing, it's been very helpful in a lot of ways.
Awesome. Well, one of the topics that we had discussed previously that I wanted to get into, and it's kind of one of the focuses of a video that I'm thinking of making, it's related to the announcement that Duolingo made earlier this year that they were going to be officially an AI first company. And I think that's in terms of their content generation and some of the other features of the app, they're going to be heavily leaning on AI versus contractors, which they've been using previously. Um, I guess is that announcement? I'm sure as a fellow person in the industry, it's an announcement you guys were aware of. Is that something that was surprising? And I guess do you have any general thoughts about that, sort of implementing that as their main methodology?
Yes, we were definitely aware of that. I think it almost surprised me how many people weren't aware of it because I was so hyper aware of it. But yeah, that was an interesting announcement. And, I think the the sort of funny thing about it is I think that so many companies, not just language learning companies, are embracing AI, right? There are a lot of benefits to it. I think when you talk about AI, you have to really talk about the costs and the benefits. Um, a lot of benefits to a lot of different ways. I don't know that they're even really doing things differently than I mean, I don't know what the inner workings of Duolingo are. I think every company is moving towards AI in one way or another, especially in educational technology. Um, I think it was the way that was announced, unfortunately, generated a lot of bad press. Um, and it came off as this very negative thing because you're talking about, you know, people losing their jobs and taking the human aspect out of language is really how that came across. Whether or not it was intended that way, I don't know, but I think that's unfortunately kind of how that was perceived by a lot of people. I think, when it comes to AI and language learning technology, or just language learning in general, there are a lot of benefits, right? So I think it can help break down language barriers. So if you think of like people that are traveling, like you're traveling to Japan for 2 weeks, right? Most people are not going to learn Japanese, right? Probably the vast majority of people are not going to learn Japanese. Some of them maybe will pick up an app for a couple weeks or a couple months, or maybe get a guidebook. Do people get phrase books anymore? I don't know. That's what I did when I was in in high school and college. Um, but it is enabling people to do things like go to Japan and actually be able to interact with people. And those are people that probably wouldn't have learned the language anyway. Um, Another benefit in terms of that, like breaking down language barriers that I think about a lot is this kind of mother-in-law language effect, where I'm not talking about, you marry someone who speaks a different language and then you use Google Translate or whatever to talk or ChatGPT to talk to their parents. But I think you have kind of a second degree of separation there where maybe you have, say you have one person who's an English speaker and then they marry a Mandarin speaker, and their mothers can't talk to each other. So maybe, the two of them are bilingual and can talk to each other's parents, but their mothers can't talk to each other or their, aunts and that sort of thing. And I've heard a lot of stories about that being like a really fun way for those people who may not have been able to talk to each other before to actually start to interact. Um, is it always going to be 100% accurate? Probably not, maybe not, probably not. But I think, in some cases that might just be a source of amusement and it's sort of generally no harm done. Hopefully it's not getting too bad. It's conjugating verbs wrong or, a little bit out of context. But um, I think another benefit for AI is not so much this idea that it can replace people because you don't want to do that. You can't take humans out of language learning. You can't take humans out of language. It's such a uniquely human ability. But it really does help generate content faster, generate courses faster. Um, Sometimes in languages that it's harder to get resources for. And so, it gives companies the ability to put that content out for people but give them, what they need when they need it, rather than it takes a long time to make a language course. So I think there's that benefit as well. But then, on the flip side, like I said, you just can't take humans out of the equation. So hopefully, even if you are making courses that are AI generated, you've got humans doing some quality control. Um, and hopefully you're not completely replacing the language teachers, right? Or even the recordings, right? I mean, a lot of times some of this um, text to speech sounds pretty good, but a lot of it doesn't, right? And so you need people to be able to hear authentic speakers and that sort of thing. So I think, there are definitely pros and cons to it. I think it's, can allow people to do a lot of really interesting things with language that they might not be able to do otherwise, like conversation partners, for example, or chatbots. Um, a lot of people don't have access to someone to talk to in another language. And so you have, that's starting to be more and more available for people to have that sort of the practice. Um, and I know you've talked about this because I watched a video that you had on AI, but that's where you talk about AI being useful and it being, fairly accurate. That's the case for these very well-resourced languages, but there's, over 2,000 languages in the world. And so um, that's obviously not the case for every language.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, thank you for sharing those thoughts. And it's funny that you mentioned that video. Because even like it's been 6 months or 7 months or whenever it was that I made that video, things have changed so much even since then. But I think that is still a major problem is that with under-resourced languages, I think it's easy to have kind of the same level of confidence that you do with well-resourced languages, but it is very, very different because they're dealing with, I think, a whole, basically they're being trained on Google translations that were inaccurate from the start
mm,
and that were never fact checked or never proofed before that. So it's kind of just like a compounding thing, especially for languages where there's not a lot of people who are able to say this is, this doesn't make sense. Um, so yeah, that is troubling. But yeah, like you said, I think there are a lot of practical, like everyday applications where you're not going to be able to get someone to translate something for you or interpret something for you. And maybe if you're learning a language, you don't have access to a partner to speak with. And yeah, they can definitely be useful in those scenarios. A couple of quotes that I wanted to mention from that announcement, kind of touching on the points that you sort of talked about, and maybe some of the reasons why there was the backlash and kind of the bristling to it. Um, I mean, I know they said AI isn't just a productivity boost that helps us fulfill our mission. To teach well, we need to create massive amount of content, and doing that manually just doesn't scale, which you can kind of understand. But then one of the other quotes related to that was, "Would rather move urgently and take occasional hits on quality than move slowly and miss the moment." And I think when it comes to those hits in quality, I don't know if you've kind of seen some of the specific things that people have been posting uh, regarding like mistakes and errors in Duolingo, and it's very anecdotal. I don't think there's been like a comprehensive analysis of how many errors there are now versus before, but it seems like there's an increase, of course, um, and perhaps due to this exact thing. So yeah, what are your thoughts about those quotes?
yeah, I mean, I think the first one is very true, and that's kind of related to what I was saying before, right? About you can get more content out there more quickly and for things that people need. For example, like if there's when you have like refugee crises and there are certain languages that people want to learn and everybody's all of a sudden decided they want to learn Ukrainian or Dari or something, right? That sort of thing happens and something like AI can help you respond faster to that sort of thing. And then also, yeah, like you just want people often create a lot of content so people can find content that they're interested in, right? You can't be sure that some stories that you decide to publish are going to be interesting to everybody. And so you want to have content out there that is useful for different people. Um, yeah, that second part was unfortunate. Um, Again, you kind of hope that there's some level of quality control in there. So I think that's a lot of why the statements like that is probably a lot of why they got that sort of backlash that they did.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's an understandable reaction. But like you said, there are valid reasons for moving in that direction. But and hopefully the damage won't be won't be too bad to their reputation and to their courses. And I guess what are what kind of conversations are you guys having that you can share regarding how you're going to be implementing either those like AI technologies or other things coming up with Mango? Is that something you guys are looking at, or are you pretty comfortable with your workflow and systems that you have in place?
Yeah, so we are exploring a lot of different ways to integrate AI into our products. A lot of it is even before you get into the language learning product is, how do we make our processes more efficient and accurate in some ways? I mean, I think using AI for accuracy maybe sounds like the wrong approach, but I think it can help check a lot of things as long as you have people again doing the checking there. But it's very useful in terms of, how do you structure things? How do you come up with uh, taglines or things like that? You can use it. How do you write an email? Which sounds, I mean, they sound like simple things, but when you have that help, it just makes the process a lot more efficient. But then, yeah, in terms of language learning, definitely for generating content. So, like I said, that first part of that quote that you shared is is very understandable. If we have these we have reading passages on Mango, and we use AI to actually basically annotate or tag the passages. So we can tell you can click on a word and you can see what part of speech it is, and you can see, how where that word comes from. So if you have a conjugated verb, for example, you could see what the infinitive of that verb is. Uh, and we also will use AI. I don't know the extent that it's being done yet, but to generate some of those passages. Um, and that again is just allowing us to have more content out there that's interesting to more people. But then, of course, there's always linguists and language teachers that are doing quality control, just revising and verifying what's out there. And then we are working on an AI conversation partner. So that's something that we have out in beta right now to a small number of people. But that's definitely something that we feel is very valuable for learners. As I was saying, right, you're not always going to be able to find a Spanish speaker. Spanish speaker maybe is easier, but of these different languages, you're not always going to be able to find somebody to speak with. And so that first of all gives you that opportunity to practice speaking, which is the hardest thing to get practice with. Uh, and then it's also helpful for people who just might not be comfortable speaking to a real person yet. I don't know if you've heard of the affective filter. Are you familiar with Krashen?
No, no, no.
Okay, Stephen Krashen is kind of the founder of second language acquisition studies, but one thing that he talked about a lot was the affective filter and this idea that learners may become anxious or nervous or worried, and that's going to put up a filter and make it harder for them to receive input and actually learn the language. And so you want to be able to lower that affective filter so that you can get more input. This is his theory. Um, and so yeah, if you have something like a chat bot where you're just conversing back and forth with a computer, it's a lot easier to do that for most people probably because it's not going to judge you. I mean, really, it's just going to tell you how great you are all the time. That's one of my biggest complaints with AI is how affirming it is constantly. It's, at some point you got to push back and not let people think they're always right. But uh, yeah, so that's another kind of nice thing about that conversation partner is let people speak in kind of a safe space, a place where they're not going to feel so nervous.
Yeah, that's very interesting and very practical. I'll have to do some looking at that into that theory because that does sound maybe even a topic for a video. But just on a side note, that bugs the mess out of me when using ChatGPT or whatever, and it just like keeps gassing you up for no reason.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah, right.
yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
that to me, that's the biggest danger of these chatbots.
well, and along those lines, I think some people really like that, and
Mhm.
I'm sure you've heard of the phenomenon of people kind of using it as their therapist because it doesn't ever tell them that they did anything wrong.
Right.
So yeah, but that's I think that's outside of the purview of this conversation, but
Yes.
there's some danger. I did want to get your thoughts on a couple of things. So there's this thought that some people are just better at languages than other people, and I think that can kind of be looked at a couple of different ways, but for some people it can be a little bit of a discouragement. I know you've talked about some of the tests that they use to measure like language aptitude, language skill, things
Mhm.
like that. When it comes to someone who's interested in learning languages, do you think there's value in either getting yourself tested to see what your language aptitude is, or thinking about it as like I'm good at languages, I'm bad at languages? Do you find that that's like a helpful mindset, or is there something that you would recommend to someone going into languages when it comes to that whole topic of aptitude?
That's such an interesting question. No, I would not recommend taking an aptitude test. I mean, you could take it for fun if you're just curious about it. The danger in that is that you might come back with low language aptitude and then feel discouraged when actually, even if you have low language aptitude, you can still learn a language. It might take a little bit more work or a little bit more motivation or, a little bit more of something else than it would if you had high aptitude, but it doesn't mean you can't learn a language. Um, as a linguist, I love the idea of taking language aptitude tests, so I would take all of them. I would want to see how it would score on them. So I can see that as a kind of a hobby, fun thing to do, but it's not going to really help you. I mean, I guess the one kind of flip side to that is maybe you take a language aptitude test, and there's usually different subparts on language aptitude tests. So there's usually something that's going to evaluate how good you are at processing or learning sounds. Associative learning is a really big one. So that's what really underlies vocabulary learning, right? So, pum means apple. I'm really showing off the range of my French vocabulary here, but um, so right, associative learning is really important. Associative learning is also what we use to remember things like Paris is the capital of France, right? It's not a domain specific skill. There's your ability to analyze patterns. There's what else? What am I missing?
Is there
Um,
some of a production probably?
there's not really production in language aptitude. Oh, just how much information you can process at once. So, which is working memory, basically, which is
Mm,
is our short term. It's our short term memory that's kind of always doing something. It's always busy.
our
So,
RAM.
yeah, yeah, it's basically our RAM. Yeah. So if you found like maybe you're better at associative learning, then that could tell you, well, maybe instead of really trying to, implicitly understand grammar rules, maybe you'd be better off at learning grammar as chunks, right? So instead of learning, this is a overly simplistic one, but instead of learning ed makes the past tense, and so you learn like walk plus ed is walked. And uh no, I can't think of any other regular verbs, sorry, but
What happens when you add ed to pum?
that, yeah, you got me. But you just, I feel like I can understand in my head what that means. Just
Yeah,
throwing apples at people.
sure, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
in the past.
right. So anyway, right, instead of remembering something like walk plus ed equals walked, or like cat plus s is cats, maybe you just remember cats and walked, and like, you focus kind of on more of a chunk structure that you might be better at that.
And probably in
Um,
learning them in sentences, maybe like, I
yeah,
like cats. The cats walked.
right.
Yeah.
hmm Cats walk, yeah, yeah, exactly.
You talked about the importance of motivation for language learners. So I know some apps, they kind of focus on gamification as a way of incentivizing or motivating their users to continue using the app. Is that something that you guys think about or try and implement, or is it kind of up to the learner to bring their own motivation to the language learning process?
That's a really good question too. That's something that we do think about a lot, and I think going forward we're going to continue to try to build more ways to motivate people to stay. But I do think there is a lot about the way that the app is built that is motivating. So I even just it's a very clean, kind of nice looking thing. It's a fairly easy user experience, I think. So just trying to make that user experience enjoyable, have people learning things that they actually want to learn. Um, it's somewhat personalized. So for example, our review system is based on what you've learned, and when you go into the review system every day, it's going to have words that you've learned recently and need to practice. Or it's a spaced repetition system, actually. So it'll also have some that you've learned a while ago that you need to brush up on and that sort of thing. Um, and we have other personalized things, like, for example, our vocabulary system. We have Mango curated lists, and you can also make your own vocabulary list. So I think having that sort of personalized aspect to it is hopefully motivating to people. Um, but no, we don't have like any of those bells and whistles and gamification things that some of the other apps have.
Yeah. And that's, I'm assuming that's like a specific choice that you guys decided on not to go that down that path.
Yeah, but it's a hard one, and it's really not a black and white question. I mean, I look at a lot of user research as part of what I do in my role, or user comments, sorry. And I feel like they're split 50-50 on whether they wish we had gamification or love Mango because we don't have much gamification. So that's, everybody learns differently, and everybody wants to learn differently. And so it's just interesting to see kind of what works for some people and what doesn't for others.
Yeah, and it's useful having different kind of options in the space. So you guys standing out in that regard, you're here for the people who love that. You're here for the people who want that, and I think that's pretty cool. Um, One, you mentioned a couple of times user comments, how that's something you're involved in, and how at times you'll even make adjustments due to that. I guess we want to talk in general about maybe negative criticism that you guys have received or negative feedback, either stuff that influenced the way that you develop things going forward, or maybe things that you felt were unfounded. What's kind of your guys' response to negative feedback or criticism?
Um, we don't get a ton of very negative feedback. I would say the most kind of negative feedback has to do with navigation and that sort of part of the user experience, which is something that we're very aware of and working on making better. So things like people can't find stuff. And that's not good. We want people to be able to find stuff, right? Um, I think we do get a lot of feature requests. So, for example, one thing that we don't do, and this is actually going back to your question about what's different about teaching different languages, we don't teach writing systems at all. And so, if you're learning Russian or Arabic or Mandarin or Japanese, or there's a lot of languages that we offer that don't use the Latin writing system, uh, you can't really read it, right? And we don't really offer support for that, and that's something that our users have certainly complained about. And we're actually, I think next week, hopefully by the time this video comes out, are launching our alphabet. So we actually have started to have this alphabet tool now where we are adding this feature to some of our languages. So
Well,
that's
that's
pretty cool.
exciting. That's
It's
pretty
very
cool. Yeah.
exciting.
Um, I don't know how, once again, I don't know how much you can talk about it as a new feature, but what are some of the languages that are included? Are there any of or is it mostly like, I'll just let you talk. Which ones are included?
Yeah, so we're adding them on a rolling basis. So basically, we actually, relied on user research a lot to understand, well, what languages should we do first, and how should we do this? So right now, I believe we have Japanese and Spanish coming out. And this is an interesting thing, kind of like how apps work and how do we build things. Spanish, is this something that people are really dying to have, a Spanish alphabet tool? Not so much. I mean, for the most part, if most of our learners are English speakers, they can kind of figure out a lot of how Spanish works. We certainly have grammar notes telling them about the sounds that work differently. And so that's not a huge need for our users, but it's an alphabetic language that, is our most popular course by far. And so in some ways that's a good one to start with or to include in our first round. Right? We want to see how things work in different types of languages. And Spanish is a very used language. And then Japanese is by far the one that people request the most. So that's a very different one. That's obviously not a Latin writing system. Japanese is very complex. It includes three different scripts. I don't know if you know any Japanese, but they use yeah, three different scripts that form their writing system. And so we're focusing on one of them actually. That's kind of the I think the syllabary one. But yeah, so
Hey,
that's kind of how we decided on those two. And then I don't actually know what the order of release will be for the other languages, but the people that are in charge of that do. So those are going to be coming out over the next few months.
very nice. Well, that was actually going to be one of my questions, but I guess you can't answer it. Is if you guys were thinking of adding it for the Chinese languages, knowing that it's a totally different thing, like there's no correspondence to the sounds. So I imagine that would be an even bigger challenge than even any of the other ones we spoke about so far.
Yeah, yeah, logographic languages like Chinese or logographic writing systems are
Mhm.
that's a really different ball game for sure. I don't know where that's planned in terms of that tool.
Well, I'm sure you guys can get to it eventually if you have enough requests for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're basically here at the end. I guess, is there anything else that you'd want to say to language learners in general? Any either misconceptions about language learning or encouragements that you'd have? What's your best encouraging pitch here?
Oh my God. That's a hard one. What do I want to say to language learners? I think I would just say learn languages, do it. Just try it out. I mean, you don't have to be perfect. There are so many languages out there. You can pick something that you really want to learn that you feel like will be useful to you or interesting, or you could just pick something that is new and different. But, anytime you learn a language, even if just a little bit, you learn something about the culture, you learn something new about patterns and how those languages work and how language works in general. I mean, I understand English so much better having studied other languages. So just, yeah, go out and do it.
All right.
Try
Very nice.
mango.
There you go. That's what you gotta get that plug in there. All right. Well, thank you so much, Caitlin. It was really nice meeting you. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, it was so nice meeting you too.
All
You
right.
know what I forgot to tell you?
Yeah.
Um, I did my French thesis I did on Martinique and Creole
Oh.
because I was like that was like a big part of when I got into linguistics. It was much more like sociolinguistics,
Hmm.
but yeah, that was kind of where I started getting into it, and
Interesting.
it was really cool.
Did you
Uh,
end up learning any Martinique Creole?
no, I keep trying to do our Haitian Creole course, and I'm not getting very far.
Well,
But
if you ever want a tutor, I'm here.
you speak Haitian. I mean, is
Yeah,
that right? Because I think I saw it on your videos. There
yeah.
was.
So I work as an interpreter for
Oh,
Haitian
right,
Creole.
right,
So
right. Yes.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. That's my main job. It's actually funny you mentioned that. So prior to like last year, I didn't have any personal experience with any of the other French-based Creoles. Just like I'd seen stuff about them online and kind of dug into them a little bit. But we met some friends of ours who are from Guadeloupe. And Guadeloupe, I'm sure you know, Guadeloupe and Martinique Creole are pretty similar in
Hmm.
that whole kind of realm. And it is funny, like it's very, very interesting the differences and similarities and like the degree to which there's kind of some mutual intelligibility, but also not.
Yeah, how similar is it? I feel like when I was doing my thesis, which was a long time ago, there was something like 40-50% mutual like overlap. I don't know if that was mutual intelligibility or what, but it was like a decent amount, but not as much. And I remember actually at that point, like part of the reason that Creole is still prevalent in Martinique is because of like the influence from Haiti, because it's so strong in Haiti.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so it's always hard to measure mutual intelligibility, I'm sure you know, and it's especially hard when there's like other kind of languages in the background. So is like in terms of the sheer vocabulary between Haitian Creole and like Guadeloupe or Martinique Creole, I would say it feels like it's more than 50%. It feels like it's more like 75% or something like that.
Yeah.
But the words that are different, very often they're still understandable because it's just like the French version or like the
Yeah.
so, like for example, in Haitian Creole we say machine for car,
Mm.
but a Martinique speaker will obviously understand. Oh, machine. He's saying machine. Oh, and he's pointing at his car, so he's talking about car. And then on the same token, they say voici, which is just the It's just the French word, but with the phonetic shifts to the Creole, and a Haitian speaker would understand that because they know the French word voiture. So like, so the mutual intelligibility is kind of more than like what the surface level
Yeah.
intelligibility is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The
I
main
think,
thing, oh,
sorry.
sorry. I was gonna say the main thing that does make it tricky is that, you know, the mood tense aspect markers that kind of Creoles have, the little things they
Yeah.
put before the verb. So
Like the
there's
ka, like the
exactly,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And that one specifically, ka in Martinique and Guadeloupe Creole, it's the progressive marker, but in Haitian Creole, that is the word for to be able to do something. So it's so when they're saying
Oh,
like I'm doing this, I'm doing this, I'm eating, it sounds like to a Haitian speaker, I can't eat, I can't do this, I can't. So it makes some sentences
oh, that's
confusing.
funny.
It's one of those things where you think you're understanding, but like actually there's a very key difference that's making you not understand this thing.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
What does that come? Does that come from English?
The ka
Count
in Haitian
in
Creole
Haiti? Yeah.
is just short for kapab.
Oh, that makes sense. Oh, yeah, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I actually got that far.
Very- And
Why?
then and then those guys they use the French word peu for to be able to.
Oh, okay.
So once again, if you were to hear that as a Haitian Creole speaker, you would sort of understand what they're saying, but it's like, why are you using that word? Like that's not how you say
Yeah.
that. So yeah.
I mean, what I love about Creole, I mean, this is probably true for most Creoles, for like French Creole in particular, it's like you took French and just made it make a lot more sense. You know, like it's especially like the right, like French orthography is just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And then
And
you see Creole and you're like, oh, yeah,
right, it could just be like that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Like, why wouldn't it just be like,
Well, that's also a funny thing though. Like, I'm sure there's literacy in Haiti is a continuing thing that we're working on. But a lot of speakers who like went to school to whatever degree they went to school and they learned to read and write in French, and this is I think more so true maybe like 15, 20 years ago. I think now people kind of caught up. But you see the Creole writing system and it's so different that you're looking at your own language and you're like, I can't read this. I don't know what this is. But then once you try, if you just like start sounding stuff out, you're like, oh yeah, I can read this. But
yeah,
it like looks so different from what you learn.
yeah. I
So
remember that like back when I was doing my thesis because I was like, looking at different things and how they worked. And I was like, wow, it's so easy to understand. Like there's certain things you need to know, like I'm like Moon is child, right? Moon, as I said, Moon, Moon.
Moon is person and Timon is
Oh,
child.
Timoon, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
Timoon, which I love.
Hmm.
It's perfect. Um, but I don't know where I was going with that. Anyway, like there's certain words obviously that are different that you need to
That
know.
you're not necessarily intuitive, especially from the perspective of like an English speaker necessarily.
Yeah. Although I guess that does come from mold, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's fun, but yeah, it's like you said, like you look at it and you're like, what is
Where are
this?
all these K's?
What is
Why?
this
Like what?
saying? And then you actually sound it out and you're like, oh, yeah,
Yeah.
okay. That makes sense.
Another kind of funny thing, I actually just started reading this book. It's one of the first like big Haitian novels, and it's from like back in the like 1800s or whatever, like early, I think late 1800s. But at that time, obviously, there wasn't a standardized orthography. So most of the book is written in French, but whenever it has like dialogue, some stuff will be in Creole. But it's basically spelled according to French spelling rules. So you
Oh
kind of
no.
have to like now sound it out according to what this like theoretical French word would be. And then you go, oh, okay, you can kind of. So like even Timoun, it's written petit,
Oh,
like moon, even though
okay.
like clearly you're not pronouncing the P, like it's just TI, but
Yeah.
you got it like it's like you're hinting at the origin of the word. But
But
anyway,
also in French, how often do you pronounce that? The p, the, like, right? The almost,
so
that's
it
like the
depends where you
swallow.
are, but yeah, it's very, 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 very swallowed. Timun,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Anyway, that's fun. Sorry.
Yeah.
I feel like I messed up the sign off though, because I got excited to tell you about Creole and then,
Oh well, if you ruin my edit, I'll let you know, and we can just redo the whole thing. Sounds good.
okay.
All right.
Perfect.
Well, thank you so much for your time once again.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to
All
talk
right.
to you.
Oh, I
Bye.
guess one real quick for
Oh, now you
introduction.
ruined it. I mean,
Yeah, sorry. So for introduction, it's Dr. Kaitlyn Tagarelli.
yes.
Okay, want to make sure I got the pronunciation right and the title right. So that's
Yeah,
good.
sure.
All right.
That's good. Most people don't call me that, but
What do
you
most
know.
people call you?
Well, Caitlin, really. But
Okay.
no, at the school they just call me like by my husband's name. It's just Mrs. Brimacombe. I'm like, oh, come on, guys. I worked hard for that.
All right. Well, I'll make sure to put some respect on your name. Don't worry.
Appreciate it. Thank
All
you.
right. Have a good afternoon.
Bye.
Bye.